Be the hero at home when you order Outback Steakhouse or Carrabba's Italian Grill with delivery or to-go. Both located next to the Perimeter Park Mall. Delivery begins after 4 p.m. and curbside takeaway is available for lunch and dinner. Order online at outback.com/delivery or carrabbas.com/delivery and get delicious food tonight.
Welcome to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast, your source for solutions-focused dialogue about race in America, with your host, Scott Speed.
Hello and welcome to the Race Haven Podcast. This is solutions-focused dialogue about race relations in America. My name is Dr. Scott Speed, and I am the facilitator of the dialogue. This is episode 17 of Race Haven, and today I am joined by my co-host and friend, John Costino. How are you today, John?
I'm doing great, Scott. And yourself, my friend?
I am doing great and ready to tackle today's topic. How about you?
Absolutely. Looking forward to this call, my friend.
Great. Well, John, before we get into the call, I'd like to introduce a new feature to the Race Haven experience that I'm really, really excited about. And that is the fact that I created a Patreon.com account. And Patreon, for those of you who have never heard of it, which probably most of you haven't because it's a pretty new concept, Patreon is like an ongoing Kickstarter campaign. Many of you may be familiar with the Kickstarters and the Indiegogos of the world, or the GoFundMes, where people are able to reach out to their networks, their social networks, their family, their friends, or to investors to invest in a range of things. And Patreon is a platform for creators, artists, bloggers, podcasters, musicians, etc., where their fans can go on, their fans, their followers, their supporters can support and become patrons of their work. And it's like an ongoing monthly Kickstarter where supporters can literally patronize those creators of the content that they consume in exchange for perks. And you know, some of these perks literally start at $1, okay, where people are giving $1 a month just as a way to say, you know what, I support that work, I support it, I want to keep it going, and this is my way of doing so. So I created a Patreon, patreon.com/RaceHaven page, and that's Patreon, patreon.com/RaceHaven page for two reasons. And the first reason that I started it is because I like to get the funds to make this experience better, make the podcast better in terms of the editing features, being able to edit the show better, as well as being able to get better equipment, microphones and receivers, etc., that will make the sound quality of the show better. The second reason that I decided to do this is because I have the hope of being freed up so I can expand this work. You know, I do this part-time alongside of my other full-time income generating things that I do. And I would love to be able to replace some of that full-time work with this, because I am so passionate about this work. And what I'd like to do is, make the podcast better if I can spend more time preparing for the show, as well as, of course, improving the quality and reaching out to various guests and just adding more diversity and more creativity to the show with more time. Also, to be able to facilitate our online community on Facebook, being able to spend more time getting in there and facilitating the dialogue in there, as well as the most important thing that I'm excited about is the opportunity to go out into the community to host live Race Haven meetups, to bring communities together through dialogue to, discuss the various race-related issues that we continue to face in this country, no more important than a time like this. Would it be great to have a platform where we're already established in communities where people know that there's a safe place that they can go to discuss these various issues. So those are the primary reasons that I decided to start a Patreon, and the goal of being able to monetize these efforts without having to bring in advertisers. You'll notice that at the end of the show, we used to have an advertisement playing that I'm no longer going to play, that I was in control of. And then there's also advertisements that you may hear if you listen to this through a podcast, like iTunes or Stitcher Radio, or Blog Talk Radio, which is my hosting provider. You'll hear the ads that Blog Talk Radio plays before each show. Well, one of the things that we're trying to do is make enough money so that we can pay the higher fees that are required to remove those advertisements from the beginning of the show. So those are all the reasons that we're doing it. And I'm excited to share with you some of the perks that are available to those of you who choose to contribute and become patrons of Race Haven. So again, we start at $1. So you can get started at $1 and get access to a patron-only feed, where I'll be able to share with you some content that I'm not sharing publicly, or you'll be able to get access to the show notes before they go live, before each show. Also, you'll get your name read. At the next level, you can get your name read on the show, as well as all the lower levels perks as well. At the $10 level, you can receive, you have an opportunity to email us your questions, and we will read your question and answer your question on the show, in addition to the other perks as well. At the $25 level, you become a part of the T-shirt club, where you will receive a brand new customized Race Haven T-shirt, #Solutions Focused, which is going to be the first one, which I'm excited about. It's already under way to being created. And you'll be able to receive a new shirt every year, annually, as long as you remain a patron at that level. At the next level, at the $50 level, you'll be able to become an executive producer of the show and get credits on all of our websites and Facebook and social media, as well as all the previous perks. And at the last level that we have right now is the $100 level, which there's only 6 slots available for that, where if someone contributes at that level, they'll have an opportunity to come on, not only receive all the previous perks, but also have an opportunity to come on to the show and be a guest and share their perspectives and get some one-on-one time with either myself, with myself, because I'm leading these efforts. If anyone would like to get some one-on-one time with me for some consulting, or to discuss bringing dialogue to your community and best practices, etc., it's available to you at that level. So I'm really excited about it. There's also some goals that we're trying to reach at each, which we'll be able to do various things at each level. There's 6 goals at the site. I won't read them off. You can go and, check them out. But I'm excited for it. We just launched it a couple of days ago, and we already have 3 people that I want to say thank you to, who were the first people to become patrons of Race Haven. I appreciate you so much. Miss Kristen Thompson, Alex Lopez, and the last person is Caesar. So I want to say thank you to the 3 of you for being the first patrons of Race Haven and allowing me to take this to the next level, along with John and some of the things that he and I want to do going forward together when we go out and do some live events, etc. So with all that being said, I'm excited to introduce this to all of you, our listeners, for the first time. That's patreon.com/Race Haven, for those of you who want to support and become a patron. So moving along, today we're going to dialogue about the recent videotaped violence in America that has the country on edge and at odds. The killings at the hands of police officers of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, and the killings of 5 police officers in Dallas, Texas, named Michael Smith, Lauren Aarons, Michael Kroll, Patrick Samaripa, and Brent Thompson. We're going to get into more detail about our thoughts and our feelings. And, just initially, I just want to say, rest in peace and my condolences to the families of all of these victims. And, there's a lot of complexity wrapped up within their lives being lost. And we're gonna dive into it. And this is probably our most important show to date. But before we get into it, like every show, I first want to tell you, I want all of you, our listeners, to know how this podcast is different. You see, we believe that dialogue is greater than debate. You see, in debate, there can only be one winner. In dialogue, participants work together towards collective solutions, win wins. Each week, I will share with you a different example of how dialogue is greater than debate. So this week, I want to share with you that dialogue remains open ended. To contrast that, debate demands a conclusion. You see, when you have people, I love that concept of it remains open ended. It's an ongoing conversation because people grow and evolve, societies grow and evolve. And with dialogue, the the feedback, the two-way feedback, it remains open-ended, working towards collective solutions. You see, in a debate-based society, we want conclusions, we want them now, and they're hard set, and then all that feedback that's going to come, a lot of times it gets ignored because the conclusion was made. We continue to evolve, and we always have to continue to fight because of the way our society is structured. So Race Haven is different in that way because we promote dialogue and we teach dialogue at the beginning of each show, and then we model it for you. Now, here's the framework for authentic dialogue on this podcast. Participants listen with a sense of curiosity and ask questions to uncover the underlying assumptions and beliefs behind someone's statements. So you're not going to hear John and I arguing and cutting each other off. We're going to listen. Number two, participants are willing to communicate their thoughts openly and honestly while putting aside emotions, defensiveness, and a desire to be right. And number three, participants approach someone who sees a problem differently, not as an adversary, but as a colleague in common pursuit of better solutions. So you're going to hear John and I disagree. You're going to hear us, in some instances, we may get a little emotional depending on the topic. But at the end of the day, we know that we're colleagues in the common pursuit of solutions. So welcome to the dialogue. John, are you ready?
I sure am, my friend.
Awesome. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go through each of the cases that unfolded last week. And it's weird. I don't know about you, John, but it's been a long week, and it's so weird. It's been so much. It's been so heavy that it feels like all these things happened a long time ago. But we've had to process a lot in such a short amount of time. So John and I briefly are just going to give you our perspectives on each case as they unfolded from John's perspective and from his social circle as a European American, and from my perspective as an African American and from my social circle about each incident. And then John and I are going to expand and go into more detail about how we feel about the overarching societal issues and the things that we feel like messages that are trying to be conveyed, and then we'll end up with our solution segment. So I first want to start with the Alton Sterling case, which happened in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Last week, video went viral of him being shot in the chest 5 times while being apprehended by 2 police officers. So we're not going to try this case on this show, but we're going to just talk about our raw feelings and emotions and the raw feelings and emotions that came from within our social circles so that we can provide context and perspectives for you, our listeners. So, John, when you first heard about this incident or saw the video, I don't know if you watched it, what did you think and feel? And then provide some insight very briefly about what you heard from your social circles about what they saw and what they felt.
Scott, first and foremost, there's never, ever a time where you're going to see someone killed that you don't have that instant reaction of horror. So obviously, I did see the video. I saw it multiple times. And each time I saw, the same reaction was, it's a terrible tragedy. Regardless of anything else, when you see someone die, unless you have no heart and no soul, it's not a good thing on any level. That being said, as it unfolded, as I watched it, more and more, The obvious question for me, and again, I'm not the average person. I've had a lot of different experiences. I don't ever judge anymore based on partial information. And the reality of it is we've become a society of the attention span of a fruit fly where we get everything in 10-second clips. I've watched it happen, over the course of our lives. We've dumbed things down to instant snapshots and instant clips. So for me, I don't pass judgment because someone pulls out a cell phone and records something. Of course, again, as I said, terrible tragedy. Never, ever good to see anyone killed, whether it was a police officer or whether it was an innocent or a non-innocent, victim. The bottom line is it was still terrible. But where I do think there was a problem is, as a nation, people rushed to judgment based on knee-jerk reactions. It would have been fine if everybody was angry, pissed off, upset about a killing, but it went to a different level where people then began to be judge and jury on a case where they didn't have the information. So, I'll be brief and simply end by saying I think the problem began to unfold when unqualified people without enough information not only spoke out, but began to create, that movement. And it just turned into a horrible, terrible snowball effect from there.
Oh, okay. And would you say that that's pretty much the sentiments, not only for yourself, but pretty much within your social circle that you pretty much gathered?
Well, it's not even my social circle. I mean, I have a ridiculously diverse group, as you know, that crosses every demographic. And yeah, the sentiment was terrible tragedy. The sentiment was outrage. And the sentiment ranged from the absurd to, legitimate thinking. But the reality is nobody had enough information about anything to be judge and jury. And that's where I think the biggest challenge has been.
Okay. So for me, when I saw it, I couldn't even watch the whole thing. I watched enough to the point where the officer pulled out his gun. And of course, I already knew the results. So I just stopped right there. And I became emotional and enraged and upset from what I saw. And the idea that from what I saw, this man being on the ground and two officers apprehending him, I just felt like it was an excessive use of force. I felt like, I felt bad, for his family. I felt bad for him. And like you said, when you see someone being murdered live, it just shakes you to the core if you have any level of humanity. So then after that, you try to have after the initial rage, you try to have your logic kick in. And for me, and for the majority of the African American people in my social circle, because I have a diverse social circle as well, but for the context of this show, I like to provide our listeners with that diverse, perspective from an African American perspective and a European American perspective, because obviously we're the ones with the tension in terms of our histories. The majority of people, were upset. They were enraged. They were furious, and they saw no reason for that level of excessive force. And even when their logic, let's say for me, even when my logic kicked in to say, okay, I don't know everything that happened. I know that he had a gun. Even with all of that, and even with respect to, police officers' situation in terms of the danger that they're in and the fact that they have to make, quick decisions and it happens really fast and they have to get home to their families, I felt like they were in control. I felt like with him being pinned the way he was, there was no way, even if he got his hands, if he was attempting, which I don't believe there's any proof of, if he was attempting to get to his gun, even if he would have got his hands on his gun, I don't think he would have been able to get off a shot that would hurt anyone or in the direction of the police based on the way he was apprehended. So in my mind, the logical thing for me was there was no reason to shoot that man 5 times in the chest. And then in my logical mind, I think, okay, let's just say he gets to his gun or he's going for his gun and you're fearing for your life. Like, is there a way to shoot this man in the leg to startle him, shoot him in the arm to startle him and render him, shoot him in the right arm that he's reaching with? Because it's, you just have, as I've seen some people say, police officers are trained, to be in these type of situations. And with being sensitive to the fact that, again, everything I said before about how hard it is and split second decisions, I felt like they had enough control with two of them to make it better, to make a choice that would have saved that man's life. And then the next level of that for me is, if you're going to shoot the man in the chest, why 5 times? And for me, these are all the things that went through my mind initially. And then for the sake of time, I'll wait for the bigger picture thoughts that went through my mind. I'll save those for the next segment. But that was my initial thoughts, and that was the initial thoughts that I gathered from my social circle. So let's move to Mr. Philando Castile. Unfortunate, another unfortunate one that literally came down the same day. And I'm on social media, and I learned that this gentleman was in Minnesota, and he was shot by a police officer. He was in the car with his girlfriend and their child in the back, 4-year-old child in the back. And the girlfriend actually started recording on Facebook Live for everyone to see the aftermath of his shooting. And she started narrating or commentating on what was happening. And I watched that video and literally watched that man pass away. And I was crushed. But John, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. How did you process that one?
No, go ahead. You can go first. I don't want you to break your train of thought, my friend.
Okay. When I watched that one, I was crushed. I was, again, very emotional. Again, the complexity behind this is, I understand this man had a firearm on him, and his girlfriend said that he notified the officer that he had the firearm on him, and the officer asked him to reach for his license and registration, or whatever, his license. And as he reached for it, he was shot and killed. And I was crushed. And to this point, I'm still crushed and miffed over it. This man is a well-liked individual and respected individual in his community. He's a school lunch server at an elementary school, and his students love him. The parents love him. The principal and staff, they all love him. And of course, in my logical mind, I understand none of that means anything if this guy decided he had something out for a police officer. But I would say in my logical mind also that there's nothing pointing to that fact in his history based on what I've seen. And no, I did not do a ton of research on his history because I don't think, again, I'll speak bigger picture, but in that moment, in that scenario, based on what his girlfriend said, I didn't see any reason that he deserved to be murdered. And again, with knowing, and then my logical mind kicks in, and I'm like, okay, with knowing that you have your girlfriend there and you have a 4-year-old child in the back and you have a job in a community that's stable, that people respect, know you, and love you, you're not the person that's going to try to shoot a police officer for no reason because you had a broken taillight. So it was like, again, I don't want to get into big picture, but there's a history of this in our country. There's a sentiment that police officers overreact to African American men and believe us and perceive us, not only police officers, but the general public, believe us and perceive us to be more violent just because. And that man lost his life for what I personally believe in my heart is because of the implicit bias that Americans hold towards African American people. And again, I'll get into the bigger picture of all of that in a moment. But I was devastated, and I went to Facebook and I just let off a rant. And I'm gonna be honest, and I'm gonna share with you all that I wrote that I was upset because very few of my European American friends had anything to say about these cases. And here I am, an emotional wreck at this point, and I'm reading Facebook and I see a lot of my African American friends, expressing the same, sentiments and concerns. And I'm like, man, we are so divided as a country that my European American friends are afraid to speak up and speak out. And I was just upset about that because whenever there's a alleged terrorist attack over in some other country or even here in the US, people are changing their Facebook profile pages to the flag of France and, praying for France. Like no one's praying for this guy. But if I'm being honest with you, our listeners, I was very upset that none of my, and I can really say that none of my European American friends in that moment that I was looking had anything to say. Now, some of them went on to post things after I posted that. They commented and expressed their, frustration and confusion, and I appreciated that. And I had, one person inbox me, a couple of people inbox me to express their frustration and confusion, and I appreciated that. Some of my European American friends. So that's kind of what my take was on it, John. Go ahead and share yours, please.
Sure, and we've kind of blurred two different issues, so I'll go back to the second killing first. Again, the situation could be, I don't know, there's no words to really describe it. Whatever you felt about the background of the first versus the second victim, the reality is the same. We watched an individual, a human being, lose their life. It's never on any level acceptable. It's never on any level okay. I agree with you that the stories about the second victim, ridiculously different than the first one. A family man, favorite at work. Everyone seemed to love him. But again, I'm going to go back to my initial statement that while I don't condone, I don't appreciate, I don't support an unjustified killing. I won't use the word murder because murder is a legal term. It was a killing. I don't justify it. I don't accept it. I'm not okay with it. Again, we can't make a decision or a judgment on partial information. And I don't care who it is. We're all capable. Every one of us has certain emotions, and we're all capable of being in a position where we snap. So again, for me, I've learned in my years and in my very we'll just say diverse experiences not to judge anymore without all the facts. That being said, it was terrible. Now, quickly moving to what you said, I was the first person to read your post and respond. And if you remember, I was very clear about why I hadn't responded, and I think why most European Americans didn't respond. And regardless of how detailed and how really carefully worded and being sensitive my message was, exactly what I was concerned about happened. Scott, we've become desensitized as a society. We've become polarized as a society. We've become radicalized as a society, and it's affected everyone. There's not a single person that's not affected by it, even to the point where you were hurt by the fact that you thought, wow, my European American friends don't care, when it wasn't that we don't care, it's that we have a very real concern about even speaking out in support and being, sympathetic or empathetic without being smacked down with the ignorance. And I'm going to use that word, the ignorance of people saying, you don't understand, you shouldn't be commenting. So we have to be really, you and I, aware of the fact that if people are going to be ignorant and say things like, you don't understand, you shouldn't be commenting, then we've got to recognize that might be a reason why either the African American community or the European American community may become silent and become afraid or hesitant to speak out if they're just going to be attacked unjustly. And that's really what we're going to get to now, because I think everybody agrees the killing was wrong. There's no justification. There's no explanation that makes it okay. But again, we'll say that's a result of what we've become as a society, filled with ignorance, hatred, and polarizing and radical behavior and thought processes.
I agree. I just want you to know that I agree. And I agree in terms of the polarization, the radicalization, the sensationalism that we all feed into. What I will say, just through, because I too, like everyone else, I have an emotional mind. I have a very conscious and logical mind as well. And initially, when I posted that, I also made acknowledgement to the rational side, and where I literally, within that post, I said, I know that the reasons range from I'm upset, but I don't know what to say, to I don't want to be misunderstood. So that is basically, within that same post where I was showing my emotion, I also wanted to make sure that I was adding some balance and letting people know that I understand that some of my European American friends feel the way you feel, John, because unfortunately there are plenty of African Americans who, in their ignorance and in their emotions, when I say ignorance, I mean some of them just don't know. Some of them don't know, and some of them just don't have any solid relationships with European American people. So it's easy to only feed into the negative stereotypes that you hear about all European Americans. And I noticed that, people that I may have come up with, or just young people that I may interact with that only grow up around people that look just like them, those people tend to be the most radical. And I see and read, or I hear their responses, and I'm always conscious, because I do have European American friends that I have that I love and that love me. So I always try to bring that balance. And with that being said, I also just want to make a quick point that it's funny, because, I always kind of giggle when adults say we've become a society that. Well, in my historical research, I realized that I just want to make the point that America has always been this way. Out of this, when people say this about almost anything, but it's like when adults become adults and they come into this awareness and consciousness about how the world is, adults tend to say, well, things aren't the way they used to be. Well, the reason why is because you used to be a kid and you were just unaware and naive. So America has pretty much always been the way it is, and we just come into this knowledge as we become adults, and we, just become aware of it. So with that being said, America's always been divisive. America's always been polarized. America's always been what it is. The things that we're fighting today, they've always been a fight. It's just, it's evolved, and there's been some victories along the way, but there's still work to be done. So with that being said, I also want to just really quick acknowledge to you, John, that my logical mind also realizes that we don't have all the details, in any of the cases, even from what we saw. But again, I'm going to speak to the bigger picture of what we saw in a moment. Now, the next thing is the Dallas police shootings. The tragic, those officers, again, I want to say their names as well. The officers' names are Michael Smith, Lauren Aarons, Michael Kroll, Patrick Zamarripa, and Brent Thompson. All lost their lives, unfortunately, to a sniper attack. An African American, an African American gentleman, but I'm not going to say his name, but he's a former Army veteran who apparently had it out, for European American police officers, and this was his way of exacting revenge, allegedly, as John has noted. So John, go ahead and share your initial thoughts about when you heard that.
Again, and people may or may not believe me when I say this, but I don't consider the loss of life any different, whether it's a police officer or a civilian. Loss of life, period, is the problem. It's the fact that, people grade one life higher or more valuable than the other. So when I heard about it, it was the same horror of, I can't believe this is going to escalate into this. because the difference now is I don't believe, I could be wrong because I can't possibly be in anybody else's head, I don't believe the other two were premeditated. I believe that they happened and they occurred because of events. This one took it to a different level because it was obviously premeditated. And again, it speaks to how our society has really deteriorated into almost, I've told you privately, we've had a number of conversations, it's become anarchy. It's a borderline civil war. And it's because people just, I don't know if everything has gotten so bad now that no one cares about anything, but the police sniper killings speaks volumes to how bad racial tensions have gotten, but not just racial tensions, just how bad society as a whole has gotten with lack of regard for rules, lack of regard for human life, lack of regard for authority. And I'm not blaming anyone. I'm not saying that all cops are good. No one on the planet knows better than me how corrupt cops are. And I've got plenty of friends who are police, and I've known too many corrupt, and I won't bore you with the story now, but corrupt police that destroy careers as well as commit murders. The bottom line is we've lost all sense of anything as far as law and order and respect for anyone, including the basic human life. So yeah, the Dallas sniper shootings, Scott, I literally said, holy crap, is this what it's going to become? So I'll throw it back to you. But yeah, to me, it just signaled, we're getting closer to the end game than I ever believed we would get to in a society.
So when I heard about the Dallas shooting, my first thought was that it's despicable. I knew no details. First of all, when I first heard, I just heard that 5 police officers were killed during a protest, and from a sniper. That's all I knew. And I'm like, what, a sniper? Like, that just blew my mind. I'm like, what's going on in this country? And I didn't know the ethnicity of the sniper. I didn't know the intent or the letter that he allegedly wrote. So my initial thoughts were just like, oh my goodness, this is unbelievable. It's extremely sad for the police officers and their families that, and it's ignorant, that someone would think that I'm upset with something that happened, so I'm going to get vindication by going killing someone that's innocent, that had nothing to do with, in a totally different state of the initial, incidents, if this is the reason, because again, this individual's dead, so we don't know anything. So I'm speculating. But if it is what it's been presented to be, like a revenge type thing, it's sad and it's ignorant. And I feel so sad for everyone in this situation because, again, for the big picture that I'm going to get to, but I'm like, they're all victims, man. The police officers are victims. The two, Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, the two gentlemen who were, I guess, suspects or who were pulled over for various reasons or stopped or, whatever, for various reasons by the police are victims. And for me, and I know I'm cheating by jumping across all 3, but even the police officers who killed Philando and Alton are victims of the bigger picture. So, and what I'll say the bigger picture are systemic issues. Everyone's saying that nowadays, so I'll go ahead and say it, systemic issues. And it breaks my heart. It really breaks my heart because, like you, I have friends, people I love that are police officers. I have family members that are police officers. So when I saw that was my initial thoughts. Now, let's go a little bit deeper. When I looked into my social circles and when I thought about it deeper, and before I knew anything, I'm just like, in my mind, because I too am a victim of systemic issues, and I too know about corruption, government corruption, etc. I had that thought, and a lot of people echoed this thought of this sounds a little bit fishy. Now, let me preface this by saying that by no means what I'm about to say takes away from those police officers and their sacrifices they made, and how their careers and the fact they put their lives on the line every day. I'm fully aware of that, and I'm troubled that they had to lose their lives. But at the same time, I have questions about the circumstances around this. The fact that a lot of Americans were really starting to hone in on, things like this was my thought process in this moment because it's evolved because new information has come out. But in that moment, um, as soon as the protests kick up all around the country and people are starting to speak about, man, we have to do something to modify or reform policing practices and the way they interact with civilians because too many lives are being lost. Disproportionately African American lives, but too many European American lives are being lost as well. And from police shootings. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, you got this movement, this push, this awareness, and then boom, there needs to be some type of balance. So now all of a sudden, someone has to take out police officers, and I'm just like, that's so unfortunate. And I'm thinking, and then the fact that this gentleman was killed, he never had his day in court. He never had, a trial. So now we have to take the word of whatever the authorities are telling us about his intent, the fact that they allegedly found stuff in his apartment, the fact that they allegedly found a letter saying that he wanted to kill European Americans, and all these various things. And the fact that a soldier that had the skill sets that he had would that served this country would take those type of actions. It just and then the fact that people would say that his actions were a result of the Black Lives Matter movement, and people started making all. And let me say it like this: in my social interactions, the same European American people that I interact with that would say bad things about the Black Lives Matter movement and the protesters and people who speak out against police and all these things, and the same people who say all police aren't bad, then they're going to go and also the same people that will say we can't make blanket assumptions about the circumstances without knowing all the evidence, then turned around and their sentiments were basically believing what all the authorities had to say about the police shooting, about this guy wanting to kill European Americans, about them finding stuff in his apartment, and his intent, and et cetera, and that they literally blamed the Black Lives Matter movement, the entire movement that's been around for the last few years, on this one lone shooter. It just blows my mind. And again, it just speaks to just the dysfunction that we are and the divisiveness. And it just, at that point, John, I was like you. I'm like, man, this is going to escalate. Like, I could see this escalating because now, and I'll tell you why. Because I have a family member that's a police officer, and the family member told her son that he needs to be extra cautious if he gets pulled over by a police officer because things are about to heat up.
Right.
And I know that police officers now, those who were already fearful, now felt justified. Like, people are coming after us. We're going to take the fight to them before they take it to us. And now those irrational, maybe trigger happy police officers that are out there maybe are a little bit more quick to pull that trigger. Not saying all, but those who are a little bit irrational, they are now justified based on the rhetoric that's going on in the world. And then those people that are irrational within the African American community who are quick to pull a trigger may feel like, man, I'm not letting them get the jump on me. And I fear that there could be some shootouts and, wars between irrational police and irrational people in the African American community who carry guns. And that was a concern of mine as well. So that's a long explanation, and this is so important, and I know our listeners understand that we give these long explanations, and they appreciate it because they like to hear our perspectives. But there is a sentiment within the African American community that you know there's some skepticism around the circumstances with this African American killer of those police officers, and you can look it up. TheRoot.com has an article about it called Five Questions for the Dallas Sniper. Five questions about the Dallas Sniper case. So, and I'll throw one thing out there for those who don't know, because I've learned a lot of European Americans aren't familiar with this. Something called COINTELPRO, and if you look up COINTELPRO, you'll know why African Americans are skeptical when we get stuff from authorities, because we know that the government literally documents stating how they literally infiltrated the civil rights movement and dug up and planted dirt on leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King and people within the Black Panther Party, and they intentionally spread the whole public thing about the Black Panthers being killers and all that stuff that I won't go into. But just look up COINTELPRO. It's government documents. They admit it. So that's why a lot of African Americans are skeptical around that case. So again, that's John and I's perspective, and that's the perspective from our various social circles. And now I want to transition to the overall messaging that John wants to convey, and I want to frame it like this, John. What are you and what you perceive European Americans within your circles, social circles, who think like you? What are they trying to convey to African Americans and to America as a whole? What are you and they?
I appreciate the framework, because I know this message does not resonate within the African American community, and it's not meant to be dismissive of the intent or the original message that went out there with Black Lives Matter. You and I we don't prepare these calls, but you and I have had enough communication back and forth that you already know how I feel about this. I feel the biggest challenge and the biggest problem right now, Scott, is we're blurring messages that don't mix. And what I mean by that is, we did an entire show on Black Lives Matter, and Montoya was on, and we talked about the fact that, for a European American who's not a bigot, who's not prejudiced, who's not racist, it didn't make sense to me to hear Black Lives Matter, because what I hear when that's chanted, when that's a rallying call, when it's an overwhelming message is, okay, well, why doesn't my life matter? I get that in the African American community, you feel, well, that was already implied that your white life mattered. It's not implied to me, because I'm not a racist, I'm not prejudiced, and I'm not a bigot. I don't separate white and black lives. So when someone neutral that's not radicalized, it's not polarized, is hearing that, it forces me now to go, well, why doesn't my life matter? I have been arguing, and I'm going to use the word arguing now, because it's not even just dialogue. We have to make a decision as a society. It has nothing to do with systemic racism. I think, am I safe and comfortable in saying, Scott, that I acknowledge, I recognize that is an issue that still goes on today, that must be addressed, that we must find a way to solve the systemic racism? Like, I'm not hiding behind that. I'm not dismissing that in any way.
I acknowledge that.
Okay, so I'm saying that is a separate issue from the violence that's now going on. That violence, it is a part and a result of the systemic racism from generations, but it's being fueled now in today, in the present situation we live in today, with the very radical and polarized views, messages, and actions that are coming out, creating black lives and blue lives. And until we come together today in right now present society and say, yep, there's a past, and yep, hopefully there'll be a future, but right now we got to figure out how to live together today, before, pardon my language, the shit really hits the fan, we have to come together with All Lives Matter. Now, again, I know the African community is going to rip me apart, and that's fine. They've done it enough already. But the reality is, my question is, do you want to be right or do you want to be heard? Because Black Lives Matter, regardless of what its intentions were, regardless of what its initial message was, completely distorted. Some of it because of a lack of understanding, which we addressed in previous calls, but some of it because it's now become propaganda. It's now become, you've seen it, we've talked about it. There are now people that are taking Black Lives Matter and attaching it to kill police and everything. So the point I'm trying to make is we can all fight to be right, or we can all fight for a solution. And I gave up the need to be right. I gave up the need to convince anybody of anything a long time ago. I'm simply saying that today, on July, whatever it is, the 15th or the 16th, 2016, it can't be Black Lives Matter and, oh, yeah, your white life already mattered. That's why we don't mention it too, and continue that racial divide and continue to just rip at the fabric of our society. Or we can say, you know what? We have systemic racism. We're going to address that. We're not dismissing it. We're not saying it's not important. But in light of the fact that we're now having radicalized, polarized killings, and whether you're right or not, I'm not even going to even begin to debate whether or not there's some funny goings on as that sniper and the police killings went down. The reality is our society right now, people are both afraid and pissed off. And that's not a good mix in our society because, as we've already discussed, it's going to lead to more, they won't even be accidents. It's going to lead to more very intentional problems. So my message is real simple. I don't want to be right. I don't need to be right. I wish to be heard. And that's why I come on here and literally hang like a piñata sometimes to be whacked with the people that listen, because I want to understand, how do I better understand the African American community so that we can find a common ground where we can understand each other and work together. Because if we keep the us versus them mentality, we're screwed and no one wins. And it's not about who's right and who's wrong. We all lose. So I'll kick it back over to you, Scott, with my overarching message of, at some point, we all have to choose that we want to be heard, we want to be understood, and we all want to solve the problem, not fight to be right because of whatever we think, because whatever we think is going to keep us separated and ultimately destroy our society.
So what I hear you saying, John, is that you pretty much focused on Black Lives Matter and the fact that you believe that it's causing divisiveness because
some people. Now, I want to be correct. I'm just interrupting you for a second. I'm not blaming Black Lives Matter. I'm blaming how that message, regardless of how it was originally intended, has been distorted. That's my problem with it right now.
So basically, because of the name of it and the fact that they left an opening for it to be picked up and propagandized and distorted, that's been called, individuals who are out to be divisive are able to use it to be divisive, whether it be African American people who are, saying kill police and then hashtag Black Lives Matter. So, so now, you'll see stuff like that on social media, for example. And then if you're a European American person, you're going to think, oh, well, that's what Black Lives Matter means. And I've seen African American people, what I call, the irrational, those irrational, or those individuals who are irrational that put their inflammatory stuff on social media and then hashtag it with Black Lives Matter, is sending a message. And European Americans have picked up that message, and now it's totally distorted what those wonderful women and that diverse group of supporters actually created the organization to be about. And I have to agree with you, John, that unfortunately, that movement and the way it's framed, I'm sorry, not the movement, but the way that the irrational among us have used it, it has caused divisiveness and confusion. Um, and it's interesting to me, and one of the things I say to people is that as a nation, we need to elevate our collective intelligence, because I'm very disappointed in what I'm seeing. We're literally, in a lot of instances, in a lot of places that I'm looking, this has been reduced to a name calling battle. And literally, Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, and All Lives Matter, like a name calling thing. And there's literally European American people out there who really think, when they heard Black Lives Matter, like, no, yeah, all lives, and then they hear All Lives Matter, yeah, all lives matter, and that's all it's about for them. It's like there's a bunch of African American people walking around the street saying Black Lives Matter, and they're like, no, I'm countering that. I'm going out and picketing, saying it all lives matter. They feel justified. Like, who do these African Americans think they are to want to say that, walk around and protest that they matter and everyone else doesn't, because that's the way it was perceived. And then you have police officers, leaders, who feel the need to say, no, Blue Lives Matter. You want to say Black Lives Matter? Well, Blue Lives Matter. And now these officers are literally stating that that the Black Lives Matter movement is causing people to be want to have it out for police and making their jobs dangerous. And again, I can see how they can perceive that, because, and I don't blame the organizers. I don't blame them. They had good intentions. I know the heart and the they're trying to do. But because we have a lot of irrational people among us, and we need to raise the collective intelligence of our nation, and most people aren't going to go out and do their own deep research to figure it out. They're just going to take the media narratives that comes down, the snippets like you spoke to, John. And those snippets come from all different directions, from people from all different perspectives and all different types of motives. And now we have muddied waters. So again, we talked about on previous shows, but as I've said before, I love the mission of what the Black Lives Matter movement is. For me, that's just a name. It's just a name, and the symbolism of it. I get it, because I'm an African American and I did the research, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It speaks to the dehumanization of African Americans in this country from 1619 to today, and how we've always perceived that our lives don't matter as much as everyone else. And it's been explicitly told to us for several hundred years. It was a law, and it was explicitly showed that we didn't. And then more, covertly, those things have been shown, not by everyone, but by a segment of European Americans in this country. So with all that being said, I understand what you're saying, John, when you say we need to move to all lives matter. I will disagree in the sense that we definitely got to leave all those names alone. I'll just say that I agree that there needs to be a type of movement towards equality and justice for all in this country that doesn't use race, because race is so volatile in our country. So adding race to the name is only going to cause problems and muddy the waters. So while they had great intentions and they couldn't foresee this happening, and if there's some people that'll hear me saying this and they'll say, no, it doesn't matter, because, that tension is good because it's causing change, because change has always happened in this country through tension and through, unfortunately, violence. But through the violence, people become aware. I have greater hopes and aspirations, and I hope that, we can find and get behind or create a movement that is more inclusive in every way, and that it can be communicated that way and speak to the same issues that the Black Lives Matter reporters are speaking to. Does that make sense, John?
It does, and I'm going to piggyback what you just said and throw it in the form of a question. Look at just what we've done in a few short weeks. It's only been, maybe 5 or 6, maybe 7 episodes that I've been on of your 16. So I haven't even been on every week. But in a short period of time, you've taken me from uneducated to many of these issues to educated and supportive. Is that a fair way to sum up very quickly a lot
Sure.
of my lack of awareness to very real support of these issues?
Yes.
This is what I'm speaking towards. If we can get to a place, and I won't name anyone, but there's plenty of people who know exactly who I'm talking about, that they don't share your perspective, and they don't take the time that you've taken to understand and be patient in the form of how do we educate European Americans who don't have the awareness. Because when I use the term ignorance, I'll acknowledge there are very educated people who are still ignorant. There are very, very well-read, very educated people who are still ignorant, because ignorance is a choice. I'm very, very well-read and educated, but I don't consider myself ignorant because I don't speak on things that I'm not aware of, and I'm not afraid to say, Scott, I don't understand, teach me, because I don't wish to go out there and comment ignorantly. So if we can get more people, and by more people I mean anybody who wants to open their mouth, to choose first to be understood and meet in a common area before attacking people, and I don't mean attacking with a gun, I mean just verbally attacking, because that's where it begins a lot of times. If we can just seek to find that common ground and educate each other, and I don't mean I'm going to educate you, but I mean I'm going to let you know, hey, I don't understand. That's a form of educating you, that I'm not being obstinate and I'm not opposing you. I'm just saying I don't understand. Gives you the chance to let your guard down and say, all right, let me help you to understand. And then we can decide if we agree now, since we all have the same knowledge. And then if we can find common ground, we can find a solution. That's how this has to work. If it does not work this way, I personally don't see another positive outcome, because the attacking that you have referenced is only going to get worse. I mean, we've watched it escalate, just like I said, in the last couple of months, from Jesse Williams speaking out at the BET Awards created enough of a stir. Can we agree that created its own little
Yes.
Little storm online? That had
Yes.
nothing to do with violence. That had to do with an African-American actor speaking stage at an award show, sparked outrage. Beyonce, months before that at the Super Bowl, sparked outrage. We now have escalated to killings. And where does it go next? I don't want to know. I don't want to see it go there. So I'm here. I know you're here for the same purpose. And I hope the people listening will listen, and those that read will read with the goal, with an open mind and an open heart, to say, let's try to find a solution. Let's not condemn and criticize people who don't understand, because that gets us nowhere. In fact, if that's all you want to do, I've written it, don't join the Race Haven program. There's plenty of places for you to go out there and spew venom and attack and all that stuff. This is a place for people saying, enough's enough, let's fix things. And that's really what I'm throwing out there, is come up with solutions that will help us find a better today and a better tomorrow, because it's clear that we screwed up the past for a myriad of reasons, and to continue that anger right now doesn't serve anyone.
Okay. So I want to tell our listeners what, the African American community is trying to convey to European Americans. And then I'm still going to get to my overarching. I want to speak to systemic issues and what I mean by that, and what academics mean by that when they say it. But initially, I first want to, tell you, John, and other European American listeners who are like yourself, who I applaud for saying and being honest and saying, you know what, I'm well read, I'm educated, I know what I know, but I was never an African American. So there's no way I can speak to your lived experiences. And that's why I respect you. I respect you. And that's why you're co-host on this show. And when I hear people say things like, what about black on black crime when African Americans get upset about watching someone get killed, you know, on a video camera or, you know, on online from video, or when they say, why are African Americans bringing up slavery or their history? I'm tired of African Americans playing a victim and all these different sentiments. Get over it. Those things burn me up because it burns me up. There's a segment of Americans, and let me also say this: I hear plenty of African Americans saying the same thing, and I want to. This is something I hear from African Americans a lot. I want to add to the pot. "Quote unquote," we out here killing each other. So why y'all getting mad when a quote unquote white person kills a black person? I'm gonna address all of that right now, and then I'm gonna give everyone a systemic um, overview that will, I believe, it'll really bring it home for everyone. So I want everyone to go to, when you get a chance, visit RaceHavenPodcast.com and go to the blog, because I wrote a blog post called "I Was Challenged to Tell the Whole Story." And I literally spent all day last week, Saturday, writing this blog post because this stuff, I care about it so much. From 7:30 in the morning, because I have a hard time sleeping in the last week. I've had a hard time sleeping in the last week. Um, I'm always up thinking about this stuff. I go to bed late and I'm up early on a Saturday, which I know some people are like, man, 7:30 is not that early. So, but it's early to start working. I'll say it like that on a Saturday. It's early to start working, even if I'm up. And I literally wrote this until 4:30 in the afternoon with literally taking a break to eat. And that's it. And I did a lot of research, and I wrote this blog post, and I supported everything I wrote with the research that I got it from. So very little, if there's an opinion in there, it's supported by research. But most of it is literally me summarizing the research. And most of the research that I get comes from academic references, sociologists, historians, psychologists, or academic university websites and things like that, and Wikipedia. And I've vetted hard, how Wikipedia vets their sources. Even though people can add information in Wikipedia, they have a community of scholars and people who are dedicated to doing research that oversee the information that's being put in there. Very, very thorough. And they provide their references as well. So with that being said, go read that, because I hit all the questions that when people say these things, I really touch on every reason why. When people want to know why, if you really want to know why, go read what I said when I said I was challenged to tell the whole story. Because I wrote a post on Facebook, and a woman responded to me with, well, what about black on black crime, and what about why are so many African Americans under the age of 30 incarcerated in this country and committing all the crimes, or so many crimes? She said, you're not telling the whole story. So her saying that to me in the comments, and I appreciated her doing that, it gave me the motivation to tell the whole story. And I did that. I literally told the whole story, starting from Europe up until present. So please go read that. But someone else wrote something on Facebook that I want to share with everyone, because this is what I don't think a segment of Americans, European Americans, understand. And again, there's some African Americans who don't understand as well, and other ethnicities. But again, I'm very explicit with saying I focus on European and African Americans because of our history, and the tension is very thick. A woman by the name of Rubia Garcia, she wrote something that I think speaks to what I'm about to say. Basically, when European Americans like you, John, you see the instance that happened in the video, you're able to say to yourself, you know what, that's horrible, looking at someone get murdered. However, I don't know all the details, and I'm going to sit back and I'm going to be patient until all the details come out, because, we don't know everything that led up to that event. And these officers have a hard job, et cetera, all the things you said. That's what you feel, and that's what you think. What African Americans like myself think, when we see someone get shot by a police officer, we literally see every story that we've heard about people getting killed or beat up or everyone, I want you to think Rodney King and what you saw in that video. And I want you to think about how those police officers were acquitted. And it was plain as day that they beat him excessively. Here's the thing. For a lot of European Americans, that's all you ever see. That's all you ever hear about, the things that come across the news. African Americans, we either have been the victims of police brutality. We don't even have to go to death and killing, but police brutality in itself and disrespect is bad enough. And we either have been victim to it or we know someone who's been victim to getting their brains beat out by police officers. And we know that, and we've known it for our entire history of and we're just talking about police brutality. And then we go back to actual lynchings and the KKK and the terrorism. And we say, again, so we go back to those things. Then we go back to slavery and the rapes and the whippings and the abuse and the hangings and the shootings and the killings. All these things go through our mind when we see these things. And it burns me up when some European Americans say things like, but what about black on black crime? Or you're playing a victim. The past doesn't matter. Get over it. That is the most insensitive, unempathetic thing that anyone can say. And I feel like you lack humanity and you don't respect my humanity if you say something like that to me or in my presence on social media. I question your humanity if you feel that way. So Rubia Garcia, she has a large following and she's a teacher if you want to follow her on Facebook. She said, all lives didn't matter when an estimated 12.5 million Africans were stolen and robbed of everything, including their decency of even being considered a life. All lives didn't matter when free men of color like Solomon Northup are kidnapped from their wives and children, stripped of whatever rights whites had given him, and forced him to work 12 years a slave, like the movie, only to be freed and receive no justice. All lives didn't matter when blacks were emancipated, only to be disenfranchised, discriminated against, and forced into peonage for decades. All lives didn't matter when an estimated 3,000, I want everyone to hear this, 3,959 blacks were shot, hung, burned alive, mutilated, etc., during the quote-unquote Negro Holocaust in southern states from 1877 to 1950. And we have pictures of little kids with popcorn watching African-American men hanging from trees and people sending postcards to their family and friends showing that. All lives didn't matter when the rise of the KKK and Jim Crow era denied blacks all social forms of respect. When a 14-year-old boy named Emmett Till was visiting family in Mississippi and was beaten, drugged, shot in the head, wrapped in barbed wire, and left to rot in the river, all for reportedly whistling at a white woman, never receiving justice. All lives didn't matter when nonviolent civil rights protesters were beaten by state troopers, police officers in Selma, Alabama on Bloody Sunday. All lives didn't matter when our government over decades systemically defunds public education, removes adequate support for mental health facilities, and privatizes prisons, not just so people can make a profit off of the disproportionately black male population, but could render black children fatherless in hopes that they too would become a statistic. All lives didn't matter when a 12-year-old boy named Tamir Rice is gunned down in a park in less than 2 seconds for playing with a toy gun, and the cops who murdered him get no punishment for acting as judge, jury, and executioner. No punishment for that. All lives didn't matter when a black man who was abiding the law is shot 4 times in the presence of a woman and a 4-year-old girl, all for a broken tail light. All lives didn't matter when police enter onto private property in Baton Rouge, Louisiana on July 10th, 2016 to beat and arrest peaceful protesters who have gathered to state for the record that Black Lives Matter. All lives didn't matter when people want to say all of this is history and we should get over it, never coming to the realization that racial injustices are hardly ever recognized by the masses at the present, and that justice historically isn't fully brought to fruition into our present that is so deep, what she just said. I have to read it again because I had to read it again the first time to understand it. All lives didn't matter when people say that all of this is history and we should get over it, never coming to the realization that racial injustices are hardly ever recognized by the masses at the present, and that justice historically isn't fully brought to fruition until our present becomes the past. The irony is that the argument today is that all lives matter. And while this is fundamentally true to the words, people have neglected to understand that for centuries, all lives didn't matter. And we are living in a Black Lives Never Mattered era. I think that Black lives have more than earned their right to matter by now. How about you? For the love of everything holy in this world, please wake up. We are living tomorrow's past today. Don't wait until tomorrow to recognize that yesterday you were standing on the wrong side of justice. And that ends what she wrote. And for me, what I want European Americans to understand, and you, John, to understand, and you don't have to say anything in response if you don't want to, because this is literally, I just want you to just process it and receive it. I just want individuals to understand that when we, as African Americans, the overwhelming majority of us, see someone get shot at the hands of a police officer, regardless of the circumstances behind it, all that stuff that I just read goes through our mind. It goes through our mind. And the reason why, aside from the lack of empathy, not from you, John, but for some people, a segment of Americans, aside from the lack of empathy, which is despicable, for someone like yourself who's logical minded, who's going to say, and you said, I get it, but we have to move past it. Here's what I want you to understand, John. What I want you to understand is that we'll never move past it. We are never going to move past it because you know what? Just like I was an 8th grade boy who sat in the classroom and watched the movie Mississippi Burning and watched the KKK murder freedom riders and people boycotting segregation in the South. And I cried when I first came into the realization as an 8th grader that people that look like me could be shot and killed for no reason and dumped into a farm or some bushes in the South when my parents were alive. Devastated me. And what I want everyone listening to understand is that every year, a young African American boy and girl are going to learn about our history. And it cannot be hidden anymore the way it was for our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation. It was told through stories, and some things may have gotten lost, and some people, because of their trauma and their pain, chose not to tell the stories. But now, with the internet and video, you can't hide these things. So every generation of African American youth that come into this knowledge are going to be angry. They're going to be angry. They're going to be emotional. And the reason why it's not going to change, because the overwhelming majority of people in power and the overwhelming majority of people, European American people, in the minority, there's a segment of African American people who think this way too, that I run into, that think that we just got to move past it and man up, muscle up, man up, and get over it. It happened. Get over it. You're telling that to a 30-something-year-old or an adult, 40-something or older, but those kids, as they grow into their knowledge, you can't say that to them. So here's what the problem is. The same way that racism is taught, the same way that all these historical ills were explicitly done and explicitly carried out, and the laws that allowed them to happen were explicitly written on the books, and luckily they were overturned. But there has never been any efforts to explicitly and proactively address the trauma that African Americans of every generation are going to walk into. You would think that it would be a freaking class in every school, in every church, in every community that said, this is what happened, and here are our psychologists and our psychiatrists to help you process it. This is what we've done as a country to move forward. And because all these previous generations were taught racism, these are the things that we're doing as leadership and as a country from a government level, because the government sanctioned slavery and all the things that happened from it. So from a government level, these are the things that we're doing to show you that we are no longer that nation. That's never been done, John. And if it's never, and here's the thing, if it's never done, we're going to be having the same conversation every single year. So I'll stop there before I get into the systems thing I want to share with everyone to see if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to preface by saying I agree with everything that you've said, to the point that I'm going to take it a step further. There needs to be education, and it needs to be communicated clearly. You've never heard me say, man up and get over it, correct?
I've never heard you say that.
And you never will. And that's why I'm making sure that the readers and the listeners all understand.
Can I say one thing, John? Can I say one thing? Since
Sure.
you stopped asking that question, I want to hone in on you and I, and where we aren't in agreement. And I know you mean well, but because I want you to add this to your comment. So I've never heard you say people need to get over it. But what I've heard you say is, if we keep bringing up the past, it's not going to help anything. And what I'm saying is, we have to confront the past. So I want you to speak to that.
Sure. Then there has been some miscommunication on my part, because I'm never going to say stop bringing it up. I do say stop living in it, meaning there are some people that communicate on Race Haven that can't join me in a dialogue today. They have an agenda to keep jamming the past, of which I have already. I'm speaking personally because these are dialogues I've had. I acknowledge, I recognize, and I respect the need for us to make something better. We have to acknowledge it. We have to do something that transforms it. So I want to be clear. I'm not saying ignore the past. I'm not saying get over it. I'm not saying dismiss it, forget it. I'm saying, okay, we're all in agreement with all that, but it's July 2016, and we have to figure out a way to live together here today. That's my message. My message is, bring the information. Let's put it on the table. Let's discuss it. It breaks my heart. As much as you, as an African American, cried watching Mississippi burning, I'm still sickened watching Roots, and I'm a white guy. So when people go, oh, you don't understand, bull. You just choose not to understand me. I have a heart. I have a soul. I could be an angry SOB if that's what you want to believe me to be, but that's not who I am. I'm a guy that's just as disgusted by that past as you are. No, I wasn't a slave, and I don't descend from slaves because I'm a white guy, but I'm still just as disgusted by it. But what I am saying is that in July of 2016, you and I cannot change what happened in the past. We can acknowledge it and make damn sure that it stops happening today in the forms that it has morphed into. Is that a clearer way to say it? That it still exists through systemic racism. It has morphed into other things. Mm-hmm. And my whole goal is, holy crap, if we don't acknowledge it and fix it now, then just as you have very, very well and eloquently illustrated, that slavery ended and it took on a different form. Agreed?
Agreed.
Well, that's where we're at today. We are the anger, the legitimate anger. Hell, like I said, I was as pissed off as anybody. I'm not saying people shouldn't be angry. I'm saying the anger that has manifested into today is not productive today. We have to be bigger than that. We have to be smarter. We have to find a solution, or else the reality of it is we will find a way to deteriorate and destroy society. And we'll do it. I mean, let's just be really blunt about it. It's gotten bigger than just white-black. It's become political. It's become liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. I mean, we have taken something that used to be, I hate to use the term black and white, but it was pretty cut and dry, right? Racism was black and white. Agreed back then?
Black and white in the sense that it was overt, but I always tell people that it's never just been about race, because there's always been European American people fighting for equality and justice.
Agreed, but I'm saying that historically it would be easy to point out that that's a white guy, he probably wasn't a slave. There's a black guy, he probably descended from one.
Correct.
And so what I'm getting at now is it has morphed to, it's twisted so much, they've gotten so more creative within that system, and they now have us divided. They have us today more divided than we ever were, more fearful of everyone. And I'm not going to get into that because we're talking solutions, but my whole point is I agree with you, Scott. Education is the key. Education and then effective communication, safe communication. But we have to remove the ignorance, and that ignorance is on both sides of the fence. And that ignorance is what is going to continue to polarize the attitudes, which then translates into the negative actions. And then the negative actions create horrible reactions. And the bottom line is that seesaw will continue going up and down, or the pendulum will continue swinging back and forth, however people need to say it, until everybody loses. That's the whole reason that I'm willing to come on here and hear and listen and learn from anybody who wants to share with me. Where I draw the line, and I've said it via dialogue, name-calling, racial slurs, foul language, threats of violence, you want to see, I tell people all the time, don't mistake my kindness for weakness. I choose not to be angry. I choose not to be ignorant, but I won't tolerate it. And that's where you've seen it a few times on the blog post. We're either here to find solutions or go away. There's enough negative stuff out there. There's enough bigotry. There's enough prejudice. And I'll just come right out and say it. There's enough people from the African American community. I've learned through this process that you can't be racist, but you still can act prejudiced and bigoted. And it's just as bad as when a European American white person acts prejudiced and bigoted. There's just no room for it. We're either here to solve a really giant problem, or we're going to continue to contribute our little piece to making it worse and keeping people divided. So, Scott, I just wanted to be clear that I will never say, nor will I ever condone someone saying, man up and get over it. But I am saying that we have to come together here, acknowledging the past and making the conscious decision to say, I want a better today and a much better tomorrow. And we have to find a way to heal. We have to find a way to come together and say, shit was wrong. There was a lot of bad stuff that happened, and we can't ignore it, but we can't keep putting gasoline on the fire if we're trying to put the fire out, I guess is the way I'll end my statement.
Would you agree, John, that it'll take more than just emotional pleas for change? You know, I see people on TV saying, enough. Celebrities are speaking up, and, you know, rational-minded people like yourself are making emotional pleas, and myself are making emotional pleas. But here's what I know. Well, let me say this. Do you agree with my statement that unless we take on some proactive measures, that nothing's going to change? Like some proactive,
Absolutely.
like large scale measures, the same way it was proactively put us, you know, the systems that were put into place to proactively put us in this place. We have to take some
Absolutely.
proactive measures to reverse these things.
Absolutely.
Okay. So here's what I want to close out with, and well, I won't say. I want to, because this is not the solution segment yet. I want to get one thing in, and yes, this is one of our longer shows, and I knew it would be. I want to share with everyone basically, I want to share with you, John, and everyone's listening, obviously, something that I find telling because I said I would address this. I want to address the concept of black on black crime because so many of our European American friends have a hard time struggling with understanding why African Americans get so emotional when a police officer kills an African American, but they don't see the same protest when thousands of African Americans are being killed each year in inner cities around the country. And I have several blog posts that talk about this if you go to RaceHavenPodcast.com. And I'm going to do something else as well to kind of speak to this. But also, if you read the post I just spoke about before, which is I was challenged to tell the whole story, it speaks to this. But I really want to educate on this. I really, really want to educate on this. So, and people, I've had friends tell me that I'm making excuses, but I study neuroscience. I study psychology. I study childhood development. And as an educator, as someone who studied childhood development, I want to ask you a question, John. Why do you think it's important that you're in your son's life?
Me and my son, what?
If you can briefly tell me, why do you think it's important that you are, involved in your son's life?
I have to be his number one male role model. Otherwise, I don't know what he's going to pattern and mimic his life after. That's my goal here as an adult and as a parent.
And do you think that being a parent to a child a child having parental structure is important?
Absolutely.
Would you say that the outcomes for let's just say if your child was in a low income situation as well, do you think that the chances that your child will get caught up in some of the negative elements of that community are greater if he didn't have the parental structure that you provide? Would you agree that that's probably the case?
I'll agree that it's almost a guaranteed fact that the child is going to look for somewhere to belong, and if he doesn't have a family to belong to, he'll look to a quote-unquote gang or group of friends they belong to.
Okay. And now, when I do research on what makes children resilient, what makes children successful, and I have several books on my bookshelf that speaks to these things, and I've read several research articles. My dissertation from my doctorate degree was studying the dropout epidemic for at-risk children, and which means impoverished children across all races. When I read and do this research, it becomes so clear to me, why violence and poverty persists. And when I read the research when I read articles, when I'm trying to just get ideas for how to be a better parent for my kids, it automatically registers, wow, if a kid doesn't have this, I could see how that kid could go down the wrong path. Like, I listen to parenting books. I do research on parenting. Like, I'm so into this stuff. Like, and it just bothers me when people who don't invest the time that I invest in these things basically say I'm lying or just don't believe me. They don't take my word for it. So, but with all that being said, I wanted to share one particular study with you and our listeners. And it says, it's a study called the ACEs study. And let me just read this. It says, neuroscience tells us that the brains of kids regularly facing significant trauma or toxic stress are wired for survival and likely to erupt at the smallest provocation. A major study of adverse child experiences, or ACEs, or ACE, by the Center for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente found that the higher a young person's ACEs score, the greater the risk in adulthood of chronic disease, mental illness, and premature death. These children also have a far greater future likelihood of either inflicting or being the victim of violence. Now 2 decades old and widely validated by other studies, the ACEs test measures experiences such as abuse, neglect, and the prevalence of mental illness, drug addiction, and violence in a child's home life. Those taking the test get 1 point for each type of trauma experienced on a 10-question survey. Children with high ACEs scores are constantly on edge from unstable home environments that can place their brains and bodies in a state of high alert. At school, even a small reprimand from a teacher or perceived insult from a fellow student can trigger explosions of rage, expletives, and other inappropriate behavior. Now, I hope everyone is listening to this, and I'm going to put this in a link to this in our show notes. I want you to hear the 10 things that they measure in this ACEs study. And I want you to think about, when you're listening to this, I want you to think about all these impoverished African American boys and girls in inner cities that were literally placed there by the government after slavery and after into the early 1900s, when they start building project developments, and when they started letting poor and working class European American families get something called FHA loans so that they can move and create suburbs. And they told African Americans, these loans aren't for you. The federal government actually wrote that in their policies. And that's how the rise of these inner city slums grew. I want you to just think about what I'm about to say. I'm sorry, what I just read in the 10 measuring things that they measure that cause this ACEs, to get these ACEs scores. So they measure physical, sexual, and verbal abuse, physical and emotional neglect, a family member who is depressed or diagnosed with other mental illness, addicted to alcohol or another substance, in prison. I'm sorry, all those things were a family member who is mental illness, addicted, and in prison, witnessing a mother being abused, losing a parent to separation, divorce, or other reason. And then think about this ACEs study. There's an article in The Atlantic that I'm going to share as well that shares the story of a European American girl whose mother is drug addicted and who is on drugs herself. She's on meth as a sophomore in high school, and it follows her all the way through to being a senior. And she took this ACEs test, and 17,000 other European Americans took this ACEs test who are impoverished and have all these various things. And then they show how with certain interventions, they can improve these children's outcomes. And these interventions showed how when this girl was a senior, her future was so much brighter because of the interventions that this school in Walla Walla, Washington, these interventions they put in place to fight against these adverse childhood experiences. Okay? And it's a fascinating article. Now, I want you to think about all these African American kids that don't have access to these interventions, that are dealing with the historical weight of everything that we discussed previously, the anger and the rage, the violence that comes from these adverse childhood experiences, and then also everything that John just said about the importance of him being a parent, a stable parent in his son's life, and if he wasn't, what that would mean. So it boggles my mind when people can't connect the dots and understand why there's so much crime and violence and killing in poor urban African American environments. And I'm going to take it a step further for our listeners. Now I want you to envision 1865. Millions of enslaved Africans are set free. Now, I want you to think about the fact that all those enslaved Africans were once children enslaved Africans. And I want you to think about what their adverse childhood experiences were as slaves before they were set free. So let's go back through the list. Physical, sexual, and verbal abuse. Imagine the physical abuse, the sexual, the rapes. Not only the rapes, but the breeding. Slaves were bred. Little girls, as soon as they were able to give birth, the slave masters made them have sex. with other people so they can have more workers. The verbal abuse of being called a nigger every day and being disrespected every day for your not only for your entire life, and I'm talking about the slaves who were actually free, the millions who were set free and allowed to go free and roam in this country. But think about those slaves who were never set free and they lived their entire lives to death under those conditions, and think about the trauma they passed on to the next generation before that generation then experienced it. The next thing is physical and emotional neglect. Slavery in itself is physical and emotional neglect. Having a family member who is depressed, mental illness, etc., prison abuse, substance abuse, etc., I'm sure you can connect the dots on the mental illness that had to be going on within those slave quarters after 200 plus years of slavery. Here's the next one: witnessing a mother being abused. Do you know how many kids had to watch their mothers get whipped, their fathers get whipped, beaten, hung? Because when a slave was hung, they made everyone watch. Or how about this? Can you imagine the trauma from watching your mother get raped? Losing a parent to separation, divorce, or other reason. Losing a parent to separation, divorce, or another reason. Imagine you got sold away, and for the next 20 years of your life, you don't even know where your family is. Or you're the parent. Oh, I'm sorry, we're talking about children, right? So your parent was sold away. Your parent was sold away. Now, you're alive. You're one of the fortunate ones. You're one of the lucky ones to benefit from Abraham, good old Abe Lincoln, signing that document called the Emancipation Proclamation, and all those good old soldiers who fought and lost their lives during the Civil War, which we won't get into the history of that, but that's complex, so that you could be free. So now you're free. What do you think the ACEs score for all of those free slaves was? And we all know, did they have the benefit of getting interventions from psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, therapists, any emotional help or support? Not to mention the 40 acres and the mule that were promised that they would have a chance to have something stable to get started on. So I want everyone to just put that in their brains and understand that this is what was unleashed. The federal government, the U.S. federal government, created the African American experience. Racism created the African American experience. We are literally a freaking government experiment, and the experiment is still playing out. The high rates of murder in inner city urban communities are results of a failed experiment. I need everyone to accept that. And I need anyone listening with any type of influence to think about the ways that you can proactively intervene and help the masses and help your friends understand to never say out of their mouths again that the past doesn't matter. Because that trauma was then passed down from generation to generation, and no one ever intervened as the ACEs scores were higher and higher. And I don't have time, but listen to previous shows and read my blog posts about, telling the whole story and start applying those ACEs scores to those various injustices that happened all the way up to the present. And can you now wrap your mind around why violence is so high in inner city urban African American communities? I want you to wrap your mind around that. And then the final thing I'll share is the difference between being an events-oriented thinker and a systems thinker, because systems thinking is the solution. I took a class on this in my doctorate. You guys hear me talk about this all the time. Most people, 95% of the people in the world, are probably event-oriented thinkers. And I'm quoting now. They see the world as a ragtag collection of parts and events. Each event has a cause. And if you want to solve a problem, you find the cause and you fix that. Applying this mindset to the fact that most crimes are committed by poor people, they see people's misbehavior as the cause of the problem. The solution then to these people is to get them to stop behaving so irresponsibly, to get those African Americans and those African American communities to stop behaving so irresponsibly. This can be done with laws stating what to do and what not to do, plus emotional appeals to be nice and don't rob and steal and stop killing people. When that solution fails, as it has over and over forever, they just throw up their hands and call it a hard problem. Now, that was me summarizing a resource that I'm going to share in the show notes about systems thinking and the difference between events thinking and systems thinking. And I'm going to give systems thinking in a second here, but I just want to point out African American people do the same thing. So when people send me videos about African Americans, saying, yeah, black people are killing each other more than white people kill black people. 90% of black people that kill each other are black. So why are y'all mad when black people get killed by white people? Events-oriented thinking. Or when the European American people say the same things, but Scott, what about black on black crime? Again, you're an events-oriented thinker, as I was. I'm not blaming anyone, as I was until I came into this knowledge. You're an events-oriented thinker. You see a problem and you think, let's get some rules, et cetera. Everything I just said, okay, I'll leave it at that. Let me go into systems thinking, and let me tell you guys how I see it now. Systems thinkers see the problem entirely differently. They don't see people's misbehavior as the problem. Instead, they see the structure of the system as causing that misbehavior. I'm going to stop there because I want you to hear the structure of the system as causing that misbehavior. The structure of freaking slavery and the lack of economic and emotional and psychological interventions when slavery ended and up until present that still never happened. That structure is causing the misbehavior. Now, I go back to the quote. To solve the problem, system structure must be understood and changed so that feedback loops can be redesigned to cause people to behave sustainably as a natural part of their everyday existence. This takes far more than writing a few quick new laws and pleading emotionally to save the world. Friends, Race Haveners, we need systems restructuring. We need proactive solutions that take a look at the entire sum total of our history and rewrite it. Understand something. I've had people tell me, Scott, you're making excuses for African American people. Any fair-minded person that listens to everything I just shared and that is willing to go and read the show notes and read the blog posts and read the links to really understand our history has to understand what I just shared. Has to understand that children, the adults that you blame, they were once children. They were once children who experienced those adverse childhood experiences that this 20-year study, this is a 20-year-old study that I'm referencing, and I'm put in the show notes, that has been vetted over 20 years, that these adverse childhood experiences lead to the violence, the mental illness, the chronic disease, the premature death. Please connect the dots, friends. So in closing, I'll close since I'm talking. You know what? I talk too much. So, John, I'll let you jump in with your solutions. We're going to close with our solution segment, and then I'll close out with my solution. And I appreciate everyone for listening, and I hope that it was meaningful. John?
Scott, no, it was very meaningful. And I just want to applaud you because I know it's something you're very passionate about. Anybody that knows you understands your heart space. And I appreciate you for being able to not just share it, but share it in a thoughtful way that we can receive it and understand it. And I'll piggyback that as the solution segment, that it's being able to understand, it's being able to communicate, it's being able to find that common ground. I don't want to elaborate on this, but again, it's just everything you just said needs to be understood by more people. And that really is our challenge. It's being able to take the knowledge and the education that you have, the awareness that you have, but communicate it in a way much like you just did, rather than the condescending, arrogant, matter-of-fact way that others attempt to communicate. I'll even give them the credit and say the same very valuable information. So for a solution, let's just, again, try to be really respectful of our audience and be respectful of the people we're hoping to have an influence with. You do a phenomenal job, Scott, of speaking intelligently without being arrogant. You do a phenomenal job of being careful that you're not offending people, no matter how passionate you feel about something. And I'm going to say that you just gave us a perfect example of how we as a society need to communicate with each other, even when we can clearly see we may not end up in agreement. We're just not going to tear at the fabric of society and make the problem worse and create a bigger divide. So I hope that people listening to today's call can understand we are right now at that place that we have got to find a way to come together, to acknowledge, to recognize, and to heal, and to become one. We have to become one race. If we're going to continue to be white, black, we can say African American, European American, but outside this call, people call it white, black. And if we're going to continue to just be white, black, and argue, this is not going to get better. So if we can come together and be the human race and find all of our common traits and move together, other than that, I don't know what it is. But that is my 2 cents. And again, Scott, thank you for sharing so passionately, but more importantly, so effectively.
Thank you, John. And I just want to reiterate, before I get into my solution, what you just said about letting go of anger, letting go of being condescendent, letting go of having an attitude, because it's not going to be received. And people will get mad at me for saying that. I hear a lot of African Americans say that it is not our job to make European American people feel comfortable. And what I say to that is, it is our job to educate and teach in dialogue. And here's what I want African Americans to hear, and the way I think about this. European Americans are victims of the same system from the opposite end. I have compassion for the ones who can't empathize. It's because they've been conditioned not to empathize. They don't know the history. They don't know about psychological trauma. They don't know about ACE, adverse childhood experiences. Most people don't know about this stuff. So if we can get past the anger and the frustration, like John is saying, and the being angry and rude and wanting to call each other names, and just educate and dialogue and teach and share our experiences and our perspectives, and most importantly, share research and learn, elevate your level of learning. When I get angry, I get educated. And here's what you guys need to know. When I get angry at my kids, I read parenting books. Like this is me 100%. When I get angry, I get educated, because I know that my anger is a result of a lack of knowledge. I don't understand something. And that's what John is trying to say, and that's what I'm trying to say. So I have your back on that, John. And I know people get mad at me. They think that people think that I try to make European American people feel good. Like that's my intent. That's my only intent. Because as a nation, again, I was here too. We don't see the bigger picture. We're still stuck in us versus them. And I need everyone to understand we're all fighting the same problem. We're all fighting the same system that has done this to all of us. It's put us all in this position. So my solution is truth and reconciliation, as I said before. And I want my European American friends to understand you need to let go of guilt and anger as well. Because some of it is guilt causes you to put forth anger. And I've experienced that as well. I've experienced the guilt and anger from European Americans who get on my post and someone had the nerve to call me a bigot last week.
Not on my watch, pal.
Yes, thank you for stepping in there, John, on that one for me. So, again, my solution is truth and reconciliation. We need leaders. We need those of you. You can be a leader in your household and start telling the truth in your school, in your church, in your community. But it literally starts with you talking to your children. We need a truth and reconciliation period, a period where we're doing the research on the history. I'm providing it as other places as well. I'm providing it at RaceHavenPodcast.com, but it's provided at other places as well. The truth about our history and the systems that have put us in this position. And then we need to reconcile and come together as one human race, like John said, as one people, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Truth and reconciliation. If you're listening to this and you're a politician or you have influence with politicians, you need to take it to the city level, the regional level, and then ultimately the national level. We need truth and reconciliation, truth about the history, listening to the people who've been through it, people who are passionate about going and doing the research and trusting us, because we are the experts on this topic. And we all need to let go of guilt, fear, and anger. So that's our time for today. A special thank you to my co-host and friend, John Costino. John, briefly tell our listeners how they can connect with you and your work, please.
Sure. You can reach me on Facebook. The name John Costino is my Facebook page. Email address is the same, johncostino@yahoo.com, or you can reach me through my company, which is MoneyWise. And again, I just want to say this was a difficult topic to cover today. We knew it was going to be difficult, but I think it was extremely valuable, and I appreciate you creating the platform and allowing me to participate with you, Scott. I believe we're going to do great things by giving people an example to really model after and hopefully influence some of the folks out there to have more meaningful dialogue with each other. Thank you, my friend.
And thank you. For our listeners, please be sure to subscribe to the Race Haven podcast on iTunes or Stitcher Radio apps for Android so that you never miss the dialogue. If you love this show, please leave us a review. We don't have many reviews right now on these platforms, and these reviews will help the show gain more visibility and listeners. We want to hear from you. Email us your perspectives at solutions@racehavenpodcast.com so that John and I can read them, and we may get a chance to read some of them on the show in the future. Please visit the Race Haven Podcast Facebook page or RaceHavenPodcast.com and leave comments, questions about today's show. You can also join our online community by joining the Race Haven Community Dialogue Facebook group. If today's show resonated with you, please share the podcast link on social media and with your friends. And remember, if you want to be a patron and support the improvement of this show, please visit patreon.com. Just visit RaceHavenPodcast.com and then click on Become a Patron because you can get it right from the website. So, with that being said, Race Haven is a safe place for people from diverse ethnic, religious, cultural, and political backgrounds to bring their race-based perspectives, questions, assumptions, frustrations, and experiences to engage in thoughtful, honest dialogue in an effort to transcend race. Remember, we are all smarter when we think together. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast. Be sure to visit www.racehavenblog.com to comment and learn more.
Be the hero at home when you order Carrabba's Italian Grill with delivery or carside carryout, located in the shops at Cumberland. Feed up to 5, starting at $7 per person with Carrabba's family bundles. Delivery begins after 4 p.m. and curbside takeaways available for lunch and dinner. Order online at carrabbas.com/delivery and get made-from-scratch Italian tonight. Be the hero at home when you order Outback Steakhouse with delivery or curbside takeaway, located at Clark Crossing in Athens. Delivery begins after 4 p.m. and curbside takeaway is available for lunch and dinner. Order online at outback.com/delivery and get all your favorites tonight.